All right, so let's recap UFC Fight Night Sandhagen versus Dillashaw. As I'm watching this fight, I am thinking this is going to be a split decision. It is close. Both sides kind of had different things going on, but when you ask yourself who is winning each round, it's a tough decision for most of them. And as much as I did think Corey won the fight, I wasn't shocked that TJ won it. What do you think?
Yeah. I think we're both in agreement. Maybe it's because I bet on Corey, but I think there is something to say from like the damage perspective. I think Corey definitely just look at TJ's face. I think he definitely did more damage, and but yeah, to your point, it's you can't leave it up to the judges, and it definitely had that feeling. TJ's been in the game a while. Like, he knows how to win fights, and they clearly favored his aggression, his octagon control, his clinch, and so you can't fault them for that. I think it does bring up an interesting discussion, and I don't know if you were able to catch any of his interview with Luke Thomas that Sandhagen had, but they spent most of their time talking about this like philosophy of like what constitutes winning a fight, and it's like because it's right now it's very subjective. And
Yep.
Corey, he was a good sport about it, but I think he was making these exact points where he definitely did more damage in the fight. He wasn't necessarily walking forward. He wasn't necessarily controlling the clinch. But if you're just talking about who did more damage in the fight, usually that's at a high level an indicator for who wins, and that's what he felt. And unfortunately, that's just not the way the fight was scored. And so I think it was an interesting discussion. But yeah, we've all seen that happen too many times.
Yeah, I mean, as you watch the ref hold both of their hands when the decision's being made, I mean, to your point, you look at TJ, he's cut up, his eye is busted, he's bloody, battered, and it is a little strange to see him be declared the victor like that. And Corey also said it in his post fight interview of, look how much damage I did to him and how little damage I took. It's a little strange to be thinking that I didn't win that fight, but as someone who tries to take it from the judge's perspective, you never know how much they value those clinch situations. And I totally agree. I mean, there wasn't a ton of damage done in those situations, but the judges tend to value that cage control a bit more than the casual fan who's looking for a knockout is going to. In the back of my head, I'm like, I know people are going to be misled to think that, it's just going to be all who's doing the shots. And I've seen enough fights, even other fights that night that didn't go the way I thought I expected, and I was trying to put myself in the judge's shoes. So I totally see why it happened that way. Again, we don't really agree with it, but that's just the way these things go sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's also important to remember it's the sum of all the rounds too, right? And
Yeah.
so if you're a judge, you can't maybe you don't see you see a punch, but it's quick and you don't fully understand or see the damage it did if the guy doesn't necessarily get like staggered or knocked down. And
Yep.
so yeah, it's the sum of the rounds that equals the decision. And so yeah, holistically and like when you cut up the fight and splice it all together, you could easily make it look like Corey did way more damage and deserved the victory and got robbed. But round one, TJ was on top of him for the majority of the fight.
Yeah.
He can't spend that long on his back and expect to win the round. So he definitely lost the first round. I think he probably won the second round. And then if the other rounds are close, the judges,
Could go anyway. Yeah.
even if they've been doing it a while, like we always say, that they're probably not MMA experts, and so they're looking for
Sadly.
something to sort of lean on, and maybe they just see TJ going forward. They see TJ pressing him against the fence, and Corey unable to get him off of the fence, and that's what they're going to go with. It's sort of like their deciding factor, and I understand why it happens, but as Corey was saying in his interview with Lou Thomas, maybe it's time that we start rethinking like what constitutes like winning these fights and make it more about damage than
Yeah.
the traditional way of like boxing or like wrestling.
And we can definitely talk styles here, and I think that watching Corey in the fifth round, you could tell that he thought he was winning the fight, and maybe that he could afford to lose that round and still win the fight. as a viewer, I was watching thinking this is probably one of those fights that whoever wins the final round probably gets the decision win. And, from for Corey, I wanted to see more output. I didn't care if it was dynamic, nasty, long shots like he normally puts guys out with. I wanted to see him get in TJ's face and just throw at him. He did a lot more moving off the back foot, and yeah, sometimes you really just have to get in the guy's face and fight a little more. But I think seeing from the perspective of hearing that he thought he was winning, that could explain a lot of that. And I also want to give a lot of credit to TJ because, as much as he's not, I don't think either of our favorite fighters, coming off all of the questions that were faced to him of a 2-year layoff, being off EPO, all the ring rust, just he did perform. He showed skill, but he also showed a lot of toughness. End of that first round, I thought he was done. And he has that gaping cut over his eye. He said something about his knee, which is never a good sign. He's breathing heavy in his corner, and I'm like, he waited another round, and this is just over. He can't keep up. And he did not slow down. He showed consistency. He showed expertise. He showed experience. He showed all of these things, and as much as it was not a pretty win by him, he got it, and that is the important part. So say what you will, but it was a heck of a performance.
Yeah, totally agree, and we should be giving him his props as well. Sandhagen, from my perspective, I think it's clear he's the scariest guy in the division. Anyone that can just put your lights out in an instant with a flying knee or a spinning wheel kick, who's big and powerful. That's
fantastic to watch. I'll just add too.
Yeah, he's the scariest fight in the division for sure. And for TJ to take 2 years off and then come in and I guess for lack of better terminology, we forgot who TJ was. TJ's the guy who walked down Henan Brow and finished him when he was the scariest guy in the UFC. He was regarded as the pound for pound number one guy, and it looked like he couldn't be touched. And TJ came in as a huge underdog and destroyed him, and showed no fear. And when Cody Garbrandt was knocking everyone out, on top of that, Cody hated him, and they had this fierce rivalry, and TJ was just so game for both of those fights. Finished him in both of those fights. The guy's a killer, as they called him at Alpha Male, Dillashaw. He deserves all the credit. He came in, he looked stronger, he looked thicker, and he couldn't probably use his footwork the same way he could against other guys because of that reach, and so he found a way to win. He's a veteran who's been in a lot.
What's important? Yeah. He got his hand raised. And I think that one of the things that we saw from Corey is, I think, something we see from a lot of guys who are used to getting knockouts. I think we saw it from Conor Diaz 1. We saw it from Sean O'Malley recently with the Chris Moutinho fight. Of they're throwing their best shots. And in the first round, you see that Corey thinking a lot of these elbows and the flying knee, like each one of these shots might be the last one. And at some point, they just start to realize it's not, and they change. And they start kind of reassessing their strategy and the way they're fighting that whole fight. And we almost saw a couple different Corys within that fight of, really explosive in the beginning and then slowed down a bit and then maybe somewhere in, third, fourth round kind of get his rhythm back. But it's always that kind of decision to be consistent and just move forward. Or do you want to impress the fans? Do you want to throw that flying knee like he knocked out Frankie Edgar with? Because when it doesn't work, I mean, this is one thing that weighed into how this fight played out.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think his style isn't necessarily geared towards winning fights. There's doing damage and being exciting and explosive, and then there's having that experience and knowing how to steal rounds and how to win fights. I think that's something we haven't really seen him do yet. Just because he either his last 3 fights, the total fight time was probably 4 minutes, maybe 5 minutes at most. And
the cost of being that good.
Yeah,
you're not used to having to actually fight for a long time.
And then the Aljo incident. I think hopefully he'll come back even better and just learn how to evolve his game, maybe evolve the hands a little bit more so he can be more offensive with his jab and use his hands more so he doesn't have to just back up and look for that knee when someone steps into his pocket. He can be more like Rob Font and use that length at that weight class. It's just such a weapon to have and maybe secure some wins that way. But I don't think he loses any momentum
Yeah.
necessarily. I think he's still right there. He just, TJ just was too tough and couldn't be put away, and so all the credit to him. But
It's a great feeling when you have a fight like that and you realize at the end that you had the right two guys fighting for whatever they were in this situation, pretty much guaranteed the title shot next. Because, like you said, Corey doesn't lose any credit for this fight. As much as he'll probably still have to win another fight against the top guy to get that title fight, you just don't leave this fight losing respect for either of the guys.
yeah, exactly. And I think he'll take a lot away from this fight. I think what DC calls it, you get the rub when you're pushed to your limit.
Yep.
You come back way better. Like he said when he fought Gustafsson, he got the rub and just became so much better from having that experience and having to dig deep. So I believe in him. I believe he'll be the champion of this division one day. But
he could be back there before we know it. Things happen so quickly.
Yeah.
Put your head down, grind, and he could have the belt before we